Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're excited that you've joined us. Our topic today is Accelerate Time to Market. It's a conversation with AWS and Asana. We have a great topic to discuss. I'm excited to get to our speakers today. And by the way, our webinar is sponsored by Asana. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'll serve as host and moderator. But first, a couple housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and all participants will receive an email with a link to the recording as well as the slides. So sit back, relax, you don't have to take a lot of notes, and listen to our speakers. We also have 4 gift cards we're giving away at the end of the webinar, so stick around to see if you're a winner. Our speakers love questions. It's going to be an interactive session, so please enter your questions into the GoToWebinar control panel, right into that questions tab. So let's move on to our topic. Accelerate time to market, AWS and Asana talk collaboration. It's my great pleasure to introduce our 2 speakers, Eric Pelz, who's engineering tech lead with Asana, and Aditya Muppavarapu, who is global segment leader for DevOps at AWS. So I'm going to hand things over to you, Eric. Take it away.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm excited to speak to you all today. I work at Asana, where I'm the tech lead of our workflow pillar. The workflow pillar is the subdivision of product engineering that focuses on making the right connection between our customers, their tools, and their processes. And we have a number of teams building features for automation, communications, and our public developer platform. I lead the technical direction of the pillar through collaboration with team tech leads, engineering managers, and the other pillar leads. And I think a lot about effective collaboration. So today I'll include my perspective from my current role and previous work as engineering manager and through scaling Asana's team tech lead role. With me is Aditya, who's the global segment leader for DevOps AWS. Aditya, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Eric. I'm the global segment lead for DevOps at AWS. And I've been a long-term DevOps practitioner and enthusiast. And in my role, I help customers accelerate their digital transformation, also do a lot of public talks and executive briefings to customers. I've spent over past 16 years guiding several companies deliver value faster to their customers via process, culture, and tooling transformation.
Great. So today we're going to cover 4 main topics, and we'll hold a live Q&A at the end. First, we're going to give you an overview of the state of collaboration in 2020. Then we'll cover how DevOps has transformed to enable agility. We'll highlight how this transformation happened at Amazon, as well as discuss Asana's perspective. We'll then shift gears to discuss how your company can improve cross-team alignment, as well as develop DevOps roles that scale. So starting with collaboration in 2020, collaboration tools have become even more critical in 2020 with the transition to distributed work. Maintaining the expected speed of delivery is even more difficult today in the context of rapidly changing business priorities, Zoom fatigue, work-life balance, and especially for those parents out there. As leaders, how do you enable cross-functional teams, dev, QA, IT ops, etc., to all work efficiently and continue delivering on time? How do you ensure that they get the context they need about the value and business purpose of what they're charged with delivering, as well as potential roadblocks that may arise? So Asana ran a global survey in 2019, and we learned that 60% of the average knowledge worker's time is consumed by coordination tasks, like meetings, emails, and information gathering. People are spending more time coordinating work rather than doing the skilled work they were hired for. You can see some of the insights from the survey here, but I wanted to highlight a couple that I found most surprising. So 83% of knowledge workers state that their team isn't as efficient as it could be due to not having the right processes. 66% of meetings that a knowledge worker attends feel unnecessary, and 54% of knowledge workers don't know how their work ladders into company objectives. The data shows that knowledge workers feel that they can improve how they coordinate their work and thereby improve their effectiveness. In challenging times like this, the amount of time people spend coordinating work only increases. We can't have hallway conversations, daily stand-ups just aren't the same over Zoom. So instead, we write emails and we schedule more meetings that take us further away from the work that needs to get done. Most people think of tools like Slack, Teams, and Zoom for collaboration. These tools are really great for conversations and meetings. but they're tools for communication, not for coordination and not for action. Communication tools don't help people manage complex work involving multiple teams, multiple stakeholders, and a lot of dependencies, nor do they address the question of who's doing what by when. This who's doing what by when structure is useful for work from implementing bug fixes to working cross-functionally on steps across the dev lifecycle to achieve large new initiatives. A work management solution like Asana or others like Smartsheet or Wrike help coordinate work across the organization, providing clarity into who's doing what by when. While your team may be using a vertical tool with a product and development focus, these have limits. For large-scale initiatives, your work isn't all technical, so you'll still need to collaborate with partner teams like marketing or customer success, and those require you to resort to other tools.
So there are multiple personas involved in application delivery process today, like dev, you have QA, ops, security, product managers, project managers, architects, compliance teams, you name it. And I strongly believe that tools like Asana become that hub for communication and collaboration in a distributed and hybrid work environment. So here's a pictures that displays Amazon's idea of a flywheel business model. So Amazon's success is frequently attributed to its peculiar way of operating, illustrated by this Amazon flywheel. This is a concept that was sketched on the back of a napkin by our CEO, Jeff Bezos, back in 2001. The idea is that a flywheel takes a lot of effort to start, but once it gets spinning, it continues to quickly gain momentum and spin even faster. So Amazon has been very intentional with feeding specific areas of its business that it believes is essential to the flywheel strategy. So similar to the Amazon flywheel, we have our innovation flywheel. To maintain competitive advantage in our digital business, one must innovate as rapidly as possible. So we need to allow teams to quickly and nimbly experiment and expose new features, maybe to limited set of users or systems to start with, hence significantly controlling the impact radius. So allow for experimentation, design processes that that encourage teams to experiment. And second, make sure you have the necessary mechanisms in place to analyze customer feedback as we experiment. So when you launch a new feature, you need to understand how customers are using it, how the systems are performing. So feedback is key. And lastly, use that feedback to inspire new ideas. And this is how you complete that feedback loop. And just a fun fact here, about 75% of features or services developed by AWS come from direct customer feedback or requests. The goal here for innovators is to keep this flywheel spinning as fast as possible.
Thanks, Aditya. I wanted to add a way that Asana uses a similar flywheel mentality to keep our product development process moving quickly. Our development process also consists of constant iteration based on user feedback. When faced with a user pain or a problem to solve, we utilize a double diamond process. This is a pairing of divergent and convergent thinking. So the first diamond is focused on user pains and problems. And while in this diamond, we seek to answer the question of the problems we could be solving, which should we go after? The second diamond is focused on solutions. While in this diamond, we seek to answer what is the best solution to meet the problem we've identified in the first diamond. Smaller diamonds to the right represent constant iteration and learning based on feedback, and represents that we shouldn't wait for a solution to be perfect before delivering it. So why go divergent at all? By going divergent first in the pains and solutions diamonds, we push our thinking by forcing us to consider multiple options before narrowing our choices. And this lets us have a very explicit narrowing criteria so we know why we've chosen the solutions. This ensures that we can innovate, have confidence in our decision-making, and still move quickly. Additionally, by going divergent before converging on a pain point or solution, it often means that we can break down problems into smaller chunks and we can deliver those and iterate on them more nimbly rather than trying to solve everything at once.
Here's one of the famous quotes by our Amazon CTO, Werner Vogels. You build it, you run it. And he's known for packing very powerful messages in very short sentences. The way I break it down, this message is, let's say in a typical enterprise where you have siloed organizations, everything is handed over the wall. We'll describe a little situation here. So you as a developer, you're enjoying your weekend, and suddenly your phone goes off with the alerts from system failures or 7 tickets for your application, and it alerts you that there's been a system suffering from memory leaks, and the IT ops engineer on call, per his run book, he just simply needs to reboot the system so that it can run for a little longer again. So this is fairly common in a traditional enterprise IT model. And the problem here is that the dev team and the IT team are sitting in silos. And it's very hard for the ops or IT engineer to understand what is the actual root cause. And also at the same time, the developers don't have that operations mindset as they're building code. So the idea behind you build it, you run it is giving developers the operational responsibility, and it suddenly enhances the quality of service because they wear that ops hat while writing code to start with. And also it bridges the gap between end customers and the developers. So they have direct feedback coming in from the customers as well. And this also in turn influences how they write code. The traditional model is that you take your software to the wall that separates dev and ops and throw it over it and then forget about it. That's not how we operate at Amazon. You build it, you run it. So this brings developers into contact with the day-to-day operations of their software. It also brings them into the day-to-day contact with the customer. So this customer feedback loop is essential for the developers in improving the quality of the service. So here's Amazon's own transformation journey that happened back in the day. And this concept has been in practice at Amazon for a very long time. Amazon transformed from a monolith to microservices owned and operated by 2 pizza teams. When we say 2 pizza team, it's the size of a team that can be fed by 2 pizzas. So it's one team that can be fed by 2 pizzas. And if you look at the monolith, these applications, they're tightly coupled and they try to do everything. They have a shared and complex release process. Just imagine introducing a change. You have to build, compile, package, then test the changes. That itself takes days, and then there's a complex process of orchestrating release activity across multiple teams. So this often leads to fragile software that scales very rigidly and often requires over provisioning to handle increased loads. Since everything is interdependent, the radius of impact for each change can be pretty wide as well. And this also makes it very difficult to adopt new technologies. So the evolution normally centers around separating and decoupling the monolith into smaller functional services that focus on one thing and does it really well. And also reorganize in order to form two pizza team like groups that are fully empowered. And also each microservice often has its own data store and can be deployed and scaled independently. So you end up with the ability to make decisions really quickly because the decisions only impact those individual services. So this leads to rapid incremental innovation versus waiting for one giant release and take a big leap. So here are a couple of tips for microservice architecture. Each service exposes an API, and all collaborating services communicate via the APIs. And all communications happen through network calls. That way, it helps enforce that strict separation to avoid a tight coupling. And each service has the autonomy to deploy and scale independently. And it's also very important to maintain that strict API contract and avoid any breaking changes. API is your commitment to your organization. And each microservice often has its own data store that can be deployed and scaled independently. And when we look at data during these transformation journeys, not everything needs to fit into a giant relational database. So along with your applications, you also need to decouple and simplify your data and databases. So modern applications need purpose-built databases. And AWS has quite a few offerings here in this space. We have the key value database, which is the Amazon DynamoDB. DocumentDB is Amazon's DocumentDB. We have Amazon Elastic Cache for in-memory databases. Amazon TimeStream for the time series database, and so on. So what is a two pizza team? Like I talked about it earlier, it's basically the size of a team that can be fed with two pizzas. If you look at the Conway's law, any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. Hence, working backwards, you start with how you want your systems and applications to communicate, and then create the org structure that will generate the desired outcome. And also empower the two pizza teams to make sure they can run autonomously. And here, when we say own everything, the individual two-pizza teams need to own everything, have decision-making capabilities. They need to be empowered all the way from planning, security, performance, scalability, operations, testing, end to end. Only if you empower, you'll see the desired outcome. So now that your application architecture and the teams are organized to run and scale independently, this is what a delivery pipeline would look like in a two-pizza team model. All the individual two-pizza teams are delivering updates in parallel and have individual pipelines for each of their services that will push changes into production. And at Amazon, the last manual gate you see is a code review. And once the code is checked in, pretty much everything is automated. And if you're interested to learn more about how Amazon's DevOps pipeline work, you can refer to the Amazon's Builders Library articles about automating safe hands-off deployments.
Cool, thanks Aditya. Those are some great insights on how Amazon thinks about agility and maintaining velocity at such large scale. I'm gonna shift gears now slightly to talk about how to improve cross-team alignment. At enterprise organizations, you often have teams working together, and this increases the need to think about how to align those teams. In addition to establishing accountability with the who's doing what by when structure I talked about earlier, planning becomes simpler when you can codify repeated processes. With so many teams, you want to avoid reinventing the wheel. When a team has a process innovation and can move quicker, or a team has a stumbling block and moves slower, you want to ensure you use that learning opportunity to bolster your other teams and not have them each working on their own. At Asana, we start by sharing successful patterns to establish agreed upon ways of working. We then templatize common processes like deployment and testing patterns that will be used more than a few times and utilize a template library to house them. For example, you can see here our product planning checklist, which we use before any product launch. This is also fondly known as the shit list of things that have gone wrong in the past. While we prefer to use testing or automated means to prevent bugs in a launch or to make sure things go well, sometimes things are hard to test for, like the unknown unknowns or the things that are hard to predict. So this layer produces an additional defense. Additionally, it's really easy for people to add in things as they learn, so we make sure it always stays up to date. Templates don't help with managing unplanned work though. That's where configurable monitoring and alerts come in. Similar to how your systems have automated alerting when there's an increase in errors or your machines are low in memory, you should have clear rules in your project process. You want to document your procedures like SLAs, who will triage, alerting for urgent issues, and automate them whenever possible. This lets you prevent developer fatigue and plan ahead of time without spending extra mental energy when you or other people on your team are in flow. We achieve this at Asana through clear procedures in our projects. For a lot of procedures, you can set rules in the Asana product to automate workflows and dependencies from other teams without writing any code. But sometimes you can't use the product as is to suit this need. So we also have a number of scripts using our public API to do that automatically for them. For example, when a bug is filed, if someone doesn't triage it within 24 hours, we have a bot that will comment and assign it to the responsible product manager for that bug. Similarly, our deployment process automatically checks an Asana project to see if there's any push blocking tasks in it. So this lets anyone in the company, a product manager, someone on a customer facing team who just heard from a client, to stop relevant deployments if they think there's a bug that's going to cause further user pain. Templates and automation certainly help with planning, but effective collaboration really requires a culture shift. Here's a quote from an industry analyst about it. Collaboration is not just technical. It's the culture willingness to share and win as a team using the right technologies and the assumption that everyone can add value. So how do you build that cultural willingness and cross-functional team mentality? The biggest source of friction in cross-functional alignment is when you're not aligned on the problem. People often jump to discussing solutions, but it's often worth taking a few minutes to document what the problem you're solving is and who the right stakeholders are for that problem. This is similar in spirit to what we discussed a few slides back with the Asana's double diamond process. Once you're in agreement on what problem you're solving, you can move forward without spending any more time talking about this. However, often there ends up being a subtle or large misalignment, and you've saved way more time talking about that upfront, because then when you're talking about solutions, you're aligned on like what you're optimizing for and what you're solving for. Another aspect that's hard with cross-team stakeholders is the ramp-up cost to getting input or approval. For example, teams like security, at least at Asana, often give the go-ahead for many different teams. So if you frequently need approval from an external team, we found it best to use the partnership model. This means that your team has a dedicated engineer to be point person for your team, rather than using a rotational model like an on-call process to get a randomly assigned engineer to talk to. This lets you build relationships with your partner, as well as lets your partner build domain expertise and share common mistakes so that you can move faster. Lastly, ensuring teams deliver on time requires fast feedback and to keep everyone up to date. The best way to do this is establish a real-time feedback loop. Establish with your stakeholders what kind of updates you're going to be providing them and at what point, so that they can give you space to do your best work. When something isn't going well, just don't tell them when the milestone was due or overdue, but flag it early when things start becoming off track. And this will give them space to let you innovate, because they know that you'll let them know when things change, but also lets them be available when you need support or resources. So let's shift gears now to discuss how to design roles to help you scale. Once you've aligned on the problem and key stakeholders, it's very important to define who's doing what. But how do you know who the key stakeholder is for a given area? At Asana, we use a system called AORs, which stand for Areas of Responsibility. This approach was inspired by Apple's Directly Responsible Individual, or DRI, principle. We established clear AORs that are transparent and easily accessible to anyone across the organization. For example, in this slide, there's an AOR that I hold. It's called Tech Lead Training and Support. And you can see in this, this AOR, the scope of responsibility that it has. For example, making sure new tech leads are set up for success with the right support and mentorship, guidance and documentation, the boundary between the tech lead role and other roles like Eng manager or product manager, and so on. You can also see who the stakeholders are for this and related AORs. So this is useful if you need an approver for your role, or there's people that you need to make sure you keep in the loop for major decisions. So we use this AORs for everything. For example, this is like a process related AOR, but we use them for each type of database Asana uses, stewards of different on-call processes, and owners for individual scripts or areas of the product. By creating and socializing these roles, we've created a system of record where people across the company can see who the experts are in a given area, and people with these roles know who they're supposed to work with and who to escalate if they need more help by going to their parent AOR. But how do you scale to having many teams that are building towards the same goal? Sometimes it's hard to shard teams so that they're completely autonomous. For example, Asana is a single page application and no feature is built in isolation. So while we might have teams working autonomously or different deployments, we still need to think about each feature and how they work with other features. In our product, we talk about something called the work graph, which is illustrated here in this slide. And that means that features like tasks or projects or goals, they're all connected together. Anyone in the company, employees or executives, can see how work ladders up to key objectives. So if you are a new employee and you have a task assigned to you, you should be able to go up the pyramid and see how that connects to your team's mission. In practice, this means engineering has to work together when they build product features. In the worst case, this can cause every team to need to integrate with every other team and slow them down to a grinding halt, kind of the n squared factor. But in the best case, it means that teams can propel each other and result in a better end result because they don't have to solve everything themselves and they can leverage other teams' capabilities for their own features. We learned through a few examples that it wasn't tractable for each team to be on their own and thinking through cross-team trade-offs, especially as we've grown. This resulted in a number of potentially global suboptimal decisions, even if they were locally optimal for a team. As a result, we created a new role of what we call pillar tech lead, whose responsibility is to enable teams and systems to collectively ship fast sustainably. So similar to the last slide, there's an AOR write-up that talks in detail about what this means with a very detailed FAQ of like how they work with other people. But for the purposes of this talk, I'll give an illustrative example. A few weeks ago, we recognized that there's a piece of engineering work that would benefit 3 of the teams in the pillar I'm in, the workflow pillar. However, the cost for each individual team to tackle it was large, just being some relative cost. And each team only got a medium benefit from it. So when we did the road mapping exercises for each team, no team decided to staff it. But that's pretty suboptimal for our pillar and for the company, because as a group of teams, we would get a lot more benefit than the cost necessitated. So it was definitely worth prioritizing this. So as pillar tech lead, I see this cross-team vantage point, and I was able to notice that teams were considering solving the same problem, and I could work with the teams to develop a plan for one of them to work on it with partnership from the other teams. So this is just an example of how to leverage role design to set up your teams for effective collaboration. And similar to what Aditya talked about earlier, this role design kind of will indicate how your technologies will work and what decisions you'll end up making. So it's really important to think upfront about how you want to set up your organization and roles in that organization. And that gets even more important as your company gets bigger, when you can't really do that as reactively.
Thanks for that valuable insight into how you guys organize yourself to improve collaboration. Here's a little data point on the outcomes we saw, or we continue to see, based on our transformation and reorganizing ourselves into 2-pizza team groups. We have thousands of 2-pizza teams, tens of thousands of microservices, and that are getting continuously deployed into multiple environments. So as a net result, as of 2019, we are seeing about 190 million deployments a year. That's the power of doing it right and at scale.
So yeah, 190 million deployments a year is a huge number. Not all of us are at that scale, but that just proves that agility and scale can only happen with effective collaboration and intentional planning. So the key takeaways to make that happen are that communication is not the same as coordination, and action requires accountability. We saw that through the Amazon quote about you build it, you own it. We also saw that through some other examples. Rapid innovation requires the right tooling and team transformation. So you need a culture willingness to share and win as a team. It's not just technical, it's not just procedural. You need to make sure people are bought in on why this is important. And clearly defined areas of responsibility help teams ship fast sustainably. So you need to think upfront about, similar to API contracts, the boundary of systems, you need to think about the boundaries of roles and responsibilities and how people should work together. So I'll pass back to Mitch now to open for the live Q&A.
All right, great. Wonderful presentations. Super interesting to hear about how you guys work at both companies and how Asana fits into the work style of DevOps and kind of contemporary software development. Got some really great questions here. Let's see. I think the first one I'd like to field from the audience is probably directed more to you, Eric. Talk a little bit more about how automation works in Asana. What can you do without writing code?
Yeah, that's a great question. So automation, or a lot of things in Asana work off of like a work object, and the most basic and common one will be a task. So the way automation works is you can define like events to listen for on the task, and then actions to take when those events happen. So for example, you could say when a task is completed, add a comment thanking people for finishing it. When a task is assigned to someone, you want to add it to a different project. So for example, like a common one we use internally is when a task is assigned to the designer, we add it to the designer's project so they can triage it themselves and they can live in multiple projects. So you can kind of have multiple queues that all kind of interact with each other. You also in Asana can define custom fields, so you can categorize work or kind of define whatever steps you want, and then you can use automation to piece these together. So I think the answer of like what is possible to write without writing code is things that react to events and trigger an event. Anything kind of more complicated than that, you'd have to use the public API for. But you can do a surprising number of things with it because of custom fields and ands and ors in the triggers. So you can kind of make your own little logic gates that do a lot of complicated things.
Fantastic. A lot of things you can do, it sounds like. Next question, I'll field to you, Adi. Can you talk a little bit about what is Amazon's Builders Library?
Sure. We had a lot of questions from our customers wanting to learn about how Amazon does things. So this is a curated list of articles where we share how Amazon builds and operates software. So it's publicly available. If you look up Amazon Builders Library, you'll see those articles. And here are a few of my personal favorites. There's one article about instrumenting distributed systems for operational visibility. Another one is implementing health checks. And one of the most popular ones so far is automating safe hands-off deployments. That gives really deep insights into the CI/CD process at Amazon, and what are those, what level of automation is there, and what are the guardrails, what are the processes. So that one's really interesting. And the most recent one is building dashboards for operational visibility.
Okay, excellent, thanks, super helpful. How about for you, Eric? One of our participants is asking about agile sprints and how you can support agile sprints in Asana.
Yeah. So Asana is a what we call like a horizontal tool. So it's useful for many different types of teams, but it's not built just for one like engineering teams. So we don't have a first class agile sprint functionality. Instead, you can easily set that up yourself, either using, we have templates when you go to create a project, and some of those, there's like categories for product and engineering, and you can use sprint functionality there, or you can just define your own. You can make a new field, points or ideal engineering days or cost, whatever unit you want, and use sections or custom fields for sprints. So it's a lot more flexible. It does mean you have to think a little more upfront of like, how do we run sprints? What's the right way to do it? But then it's really easy to kind of tweak that and iterate on it and use it with all of the other features in Asana and other teammates that aren't just engineers.
You know, Eric, if I can add, there's a lot of interest around agile business processes, and I worked alongside a marketing team actually that used the whole agile sprint process, and they were Asana users. It's pretty fascinating just how effective it was. It's very cool.
Yeah, I was
sorry,
just gonna say I always like seeing in research sessions how customers use very similar work styles that I'm used to in completely different industries. I always find that very, very interesting.
It's amazing what customers innovations they create using products like yours.
Yeah.
How about Adi? Can you talk about any tips or guidance? This is sort of a big question. Tips or guidance for companies that are looking to transform, I assume they mean about how you create software and how teams work, like Amazon. Any suggestions, kind of key principles or places to get started?
Sure. One thing I would start with is even with the builders library and the articles, Amazon's way is what worked for Amazon at our scale. My recommendation is don't try to cookie cutter apply it. Take those learnings and see what works best for your organization based on where you are and the transformation journey. And also talking about Agile and DevOps, the expected outcome of these processes and practices is to deliver value faster. Don't look at DevOps as a team or a project. It's fundamentally changing how you deliver software by changing culture, process, and using the right set of tools to get the job done. And I've seen certain large enterprises try to apply DevOps and SRE models quite literally, and they simply renamed their teams to SRE and DevOps. That's an anti-pattern. That doesn't really help anyone. You're trying to break silos. You just create another silo, which further complicates things. So focus on delivering value in a secured manner and work backwards, and then organize yourselves and set up for success.
Excellent, excellent. And I think showing this webinar, frankly, to other folks in your organization would be a big help too. So thank you, Adi. Eric, so one of the questions that we have is about the separation of duties and how you operate in an environment where oftentimes that's implemented for lots of reasons. You know, it can be compliance or kind of being able to. Security teams do that a lot, in my experience. Can you talk a little bit about how you integrate that into how the teams work?
Yeah, so I think this is in the context of like a single team when you have like specialists, or
Yeah, a single team that is following this. If you develop it, you operate it mode.
Yeah, I'll shift a few slides back to this AOR, area of responsibility principle, isn't just used for cross-team responsibilities. I think it's most interesting for cross-team because there's so many different potential people you might be working with. But we call a similar variant of it a team AOR, a team area of responsibility. So some teams, especially teams that have been around a while or are on the large side, might have a lot of systems or a lot of areas within their team that they're responsible for. And it's not that other external stakeholders need to know about it, but people within the team need to know about who's responsible. So for example, if there is a team on call and they get paged and there's a problem, they might need to know, like, it's a niche area of the system that they're responsible for, who's the person to go to for that. And you don't have to rely on kind of just like conventional like wisdom of you heard this. You can just open up your directory of team AORs and see, oh, this part of the system is responsible by, I don't know, Bob or whoever. So I think the same kind of context here, it's just the scope of responsibility is going to be smaller and within the team, but you can kind of imagine the whole set of your team's responsibilities having like segmented out and having a different written up area of responsibility. I think this has lots of benefits for collaboration, but as the previously a manager perspective, I also think this is really great for individuals' growth and autonomy, because they can have full ownership of a system and think about how to innovate on it without that always going through the team's tech lead or the team's manager. So it creates a lot more leadership opportunities that are just very scoped and clear what you need approval for and things like that.
Yeah, I can imagine the benefit of that clarity. How often do we ask, who does this? And of course, it's usually not the person who does it that responds and has to take care of the work.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question for you, Eric. So it sounds like someone who's likes Asana a lot. They said, I think Asana's multi-homing is an outstanding feature. Is Asana the only company doing this? Now, I'm sure you can't give a treatise to a whole industry of collaboration tools and who else is doing what, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about that multi-home feature and why that's unique.
Yeah. So yeah, I can't say I have a full inventory of competitors, but I think two things on this. So one, for people who haven't used Asana too much, multi-homing you can think of akin to like labels versus folders. So tasks don't just live in one project, but they can live in multiple. And the benefit here is just like in the real world, like work isn't fully siloed. Something that's an engineering driven initiative might have components from marketing or might have components from, I don't know, IT or QA or other things, and you want to be able to add those tasks to those other projects without having so those other teams can kind of prioritize those without having the work removed from your queue. So I think this is just indicative of how we think about Asana and the way our product is built. So this is what we call the work graph, but it's we think of it like a graph, and it's not just the name of it because it's cute. It's work is all connected to many other places, and these connections become really important to make people more efficient. So we don't design features in silos, and we make sure that work can be connected the same way that it would in the real world. So yeah, I think the short answer is we spend a large bulk of our time developing features thinking about the data modeling aspect, or what we call the conceptual modeling of like, how do users think about the feature? How are features connected to each other? What do we expect those connections to manifest as like user value? And I think multi-homing is one example of that.
Yeah, that work graph sounds like hugely important, especially in this kind of work that we're talking about that is asynchronous and kind of non-linear, like traditional projects are managed. So sounds like that's super valuable. Next question is a question about COVID. Of course, we can't go, any meeting or online session of some kind talking about the current situation with the pandemic. Love to hear from both of you. How has that changed how you work at all, or has it? How about Adi, if you want to go first?
Yeah, I think collaboration has become a key to be successful in this new hybrid work environment, and most of the companies have been embracing it pretty well. And there are also companies that have been doing this even before the COVID situation. So tools like Asana are definitely helpful in this time and situation.
Yeah.
Very
So
yeah, go ahead, Eric. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I think the work, what I've seen from people is the work itself day to day hasn't actually changed that much. We kind of already operated in a way that was like most things were written down in Asana or in a Google Doc or something, and it wasn't too hard to like shift that to virtual meetings. I think the two things that have been harder, one is kind of the planning processes, when you often like go on a whiteboard or use sticky notes or like use physical pieces of paper to kind of brainstorm, and sometimes the technology gets in the way of that. And those luckily are less frequent than the day-to-day, so we're able to kind of spend a little bit of time thinking about like what's the right way to make that virtual, and there's lots of tools to help with that. The other is, I think, for managers and people like that who are responsible for the people and not the work, that's a lot harder in remote time. You don't have the same connections you do, especially for people who are starting work remotely and you've never met them in real life. You don't really have the social cues you're used to. You can't really see in a video chat or in text like how they're feeling about something and how they're responding. So I think a lot of the like soft skills get a lot harder, but the day-to-day work itself, I think for most people is at least if you're using tools like Asana or Slack and Microsoft Teams and things like that, it's less of an adjustment.
You kind of wonder if the current situation will emerge with fewer micromanagers.
Exactly, yeah.
Form of work. You mentioned meetings. One of the questions that we received is, aside from scheduling meetings or writing emails, what other ways of keeping people on other teams up to date if your work impacts theirs? That'd be for Eric, yeah.
For me, okay. Yeah, I think it kind of depends what the rest, like what your company is using to track things. So I think the best updates are ones that are kind of adjacent to the work that's happening, and you can find it when you're looking at the work. So if you're using a document or something, I think like it's probably better to put those updates in the document and then link to them versus having them separately, and you have to like kind of like search your email or search your wherever your other communication comes through. But I've seen it work best when you kind of predefine what the updates you are giving someone is, and kind of just like establish, especially in this remote time, like how do they want to hear from you? Do they want a quick message the first time something starts looking like it's going off track? Do they want kind of you to wait until you have an assessment of like the impact and like next steps? So I think it's really depends on the people you're working with and what they're looking for. And I think there's a lot of ways to achieve this. People like can write up like a how to work with me document, or they could at the start of a project have like a project kickoff phase where they talk to their stakeholders about when they're expecting to update people and how. But I think that little bit of planning often doesn't take that long and kind of yields a lot of dividends throughout the whole project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've even seen people include that in their profiles, how best to communicate with me or when. Lots of techniques like that. I'd like to circle back to you, Adi. We had a prior question talking about separation of duties, and given the kind of work and the amount and size of work that happens at Amazon, can you talk a little bit about the build-run scenario and how compliance is maintained? When you're in an environment where traditionally that's separation of duties is one of the key principles of that.
Sure. Even before my time at Amazon, this is a problem I encountered for a large enterprise, retail enterprise that was going through the transformation. It boils down to your pipeline, right? In the pipeline, you have build, deploy, test, and then launch into production happening. And pretty much any change that you're introducing needs to be treated as code. So they become source files just like your application code. So infrastructure as code, OS patching, configuration, you name it, everything is treated as code and maintained in a version control system. And the pipeline becomes your collaboration platform between various teams. Let's say infrastructure as code. You can have your IT teams contributing to this pipeline, and the output or outcome of the infrastructure as code will be used by, let's say, the application code pipeline during deployments. So when you're doing a sandbox deployment, you need a certified image that is blessed by your IT or security team. So this is how you leverage this pipeline to bridge those gaps, break those silos, still maintain separation of duties. And some of the more complex pipelines, they include different types of testing, both unit functional integration, load testing, browser-based testing, synthetic tests, API smoke tests. So all, again, there's another example where all teams are contributing and collaborating towards that single pipeline of delivery.
Fantastic, man. What a great experience to fall back on and share with us. We were coming close to the top of the hour here. I have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of at the end, but let's fit in one more question for you, Eric. One person is asking about the types of integrations that are available to connect Asana to developer tools.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a pretty exhaustive list if you just Google Asana integrations, but I think the ones that I find the most interesting are ones that kind of like connect into your other tools that make it so you don't have to manually update the status or like check multiple things. So for example, there's a Jira integration, which from Asana, you or your marketer, whoever, could create Jira tickets, put them in the right project, set the right fields, and then when they're updated from Asana, they could see like who it's assigned to, if it's completed, and things like that. And that means that you don't have to check multiple tools because you'll see from just Asana how things are updated. And I think there's similar kinds of things with Slack, where you can push notifications to Slack, or you can take Slack messages that you feel like are actionable and create tasks, or add that comment to a task. Microsoft Teams is similar. Gmail is you can take emails and kind of move them to Asana if you want to action on them later. There's lots of other ones like Sentry, GitHub, Fabricator, things like that. But I think those are the ones that are my favorite. And the public, or the developer tools to build these are all public, so or almost all public, I should say. So you can build your own using whatever tool you want, or just write a like quick little script that, I don't know, runs on a cron or something if you want to do something on some cadence in Asana that you don't want to build out a full thing for.
Excellent. I'm sure glad you mentioned tools like Jira, and of course Slack and Team and others in such high use right now. So a lot of business processes built around that. Well, both of you have been fantastic, and thank you for helping us with so many great questions. And thanks to our audience for those questions too. We're going to need to wrap things up here, and I'd like to announce the winners of our gift cards, Amazon gift cards. The 4 winners are Adam B, Ann R, Jean B, and Christina S. Now, the folks here at Media Ops with DevOps.com will be reaching out to you and share with you how to get those cards to you. And we have recorded today's session, so all people who are attending the session today will receive an email with a link to the recording and also to the slides. So if you joined us a little bit late, no worries, you can go back and check out, or if you want to revisit some of the content here from Eric and Adi, no problem. Well, Eric Pelz, Engineering Tech Lead with Asana, and Adi Muppavarapu, who is Global Segment Leader for DevOps at AWS. Thank you to both of you for your wonderful presentations. And we'd also like to thank you, our audience. You know, your time is extremely valuable. And the fact that you would spend an hour of it with us, we're very honored, and we appreciate you doing that. It's been my pleasure to be your host today, and hope that everyone is safe, well, and be careful out there.